Think about this for a moment. When was the last time you felt truly well without having to buy something to achieve that feeling? When was the last time your physical health, your mental peace, your emotional balance, or your sense of security felt like natural states rather than expensive achievements you had to purchase through wellness apps, therapy subscriptions, fitness memberships, organic food premiums, meditation courses, life coaching session, or pharmaceutical intervention? If you're struggling to remember, you're not alone, and more importantly, this isn't your personal failing. This is the predictable outcome of a systematic transformation that has occurred over the past decade, where what we once understood as basic human well-being has been methodically converted into market commodities that you must now buy to access. The numbers paint a stark picture that should alarm every person living in modern society. Americans now spend over $1.5 trillion annually on what the wellness industry calls well-being products and services. That's more than the GDP of most countries, spent on things that previous generations considered natural byproducts of community support, economic security, and social cohesion. Meanwhile, rates of anxiety have increased by over 300% since 1990. Depression affects nearly 30% of adults at some point in their lives, and chronic stress-related illnesses have become the leading cause of workplace disability. Here's the contradiction that should make you pause. We're spending more money than ever on wellness while becoming measurably less well as a society. This isn't coincidence. This is the direct result of economic policies that have systematically dismantled the social and economic conditions that naturally produce human well-being, while simultaneously cutting profitable markets out of the desperate need to restore what was taken away. This transformation didn't happen by accident, and it didn't happen overnight. It represents the successful implementation of a specific economic philosophy that was most clearly articulated by Nobel Prize-winning economist Milton Friedman, whose ideas became the blueprint for what we now call neoliberalism. Friedman promised that free market mechanisms would create unprecedented prosperity and freedom for everyone. He argued that when government stepped back and allowed market forces to operate without interference, competition would drive down prices, increase quality, and ultimately deliver better outcomes for consumers in every sector of life. His vision was seductive. Imagine a world where your well-being wasn't dependent on imperfect government programs or social institutions, but instead could be optimized through your own individual choices in efficient, competitive markets that responded to your specific needs and preferences. But here's what Friedman's promise has actually delivered, and what I'm going to reveal to you today through 8 specific mechanisms that have transformed your fundamental human needs into profit centers for others. I'm going to show you exactly how the well-being you should experience as a natural consequence of living in a healthy society has been systematically removed from the social commons and repackaged as individual consumer products. More importantly, I am going to demonstrate how this process has created the very problems it claims to solve, trapping you in cycles of consumption that generate profits for others while leaving you increasingly dependent, anxious, and unwell. By the end of our time together, you'll understand not only how this system operates, but also how to recognize its mechanisms in your own life and begin to reclaim authentic well-being that doesn't require a credit card to access. The first mechanism through which neoliberalism converted your well-being into a product is what I call the privatization of mental health. Milton Friedman argued that private markets would deliver mental health care more efficiently than public systems because competition would drive innovation and reduce costs, while government involvement created bureaucratic inefficiencies and one-size-fits-all solutions that didn't serve individual needs. His vision promised that entrepreneurial healthcare providers would develop personalized treatment, competitive pricing would make care accessible to everyone, and market incentives would drive rapid advancement in therapeutic techniques and outcomes. What actually happened represents one of the most devastating examples of market failure in human services. As public mental health infrastructure was systematically defunded and privatized over the past 30 years, access to mental health care became contingent on your ability to pay premium prices in a largely unregulated market. Today, a single therapy session costs between $100 and $300, making weekly therapy unaffordable for the majority of working people. But here's where the mechanism becomes truly insidious. As genuine professional mental health care became economically inaccessible to most people, a massive market emerged for commodified wellness alternatives that promised to deliver the benefits of therapy through consumer products you can purchase. The data reveals the scope of this transformation. Over 200 million people now use mental health apps that cost between $5 and $50 per month, generating over $5 billion in annual revenue for tech companies that provide algorithmic interactions instead of human therapeutic relationships. Another $800 million is spent annually on online therapy platforms that connect you providers for brief, standardized sessions that prioritize volume over depth. Meanwhile, the self-help industry has grown to over $13 billion annually, selling books, courses, workshops, and coaching programs that promise to deliver therapeutic outcomes through individual consumption and effort. Here's the psychological trap this creates. When you can't afford genuine mental health care, you're presented with dozens of affordable alternatives that promise similar results through your individual purchasing power and personal effort. When these products inevitably fail to address the deeper social and economic causes of your distress, you don't question the system that created the problem. Instead, you blame yourself for not being committed enough, not trying hard enough, or not finding the right product yet. You then purchase additional wellness products, creating profits for companies while remaining trapped in cycles of individual consumption that can never address the systemic conditions that are making you unwell in the first place. The second mechanism operates through what I call the commodification of community connection. Friedman's market theory predicted that private enterprises would create superior social networks because they would have direct incentives to satisfy customer needs for meaningful relationships and community belonging, unlike government or traditional social institutions that lacked competitive pressures to innovate or respond to individual preference. The promise was that market-driven social platforms and community services would deliver more authentic, more efficient, and more personalized connection, and the organic community had formed naturally around neighborhood, workplaces, and shared interests. But the reality of commodified community reveals a fundamental contradiction between the nature of authentic human connection and the requirements of profitable business models. Genuine community relationships develop through shared experiences, mutual support during difficulties, and long-term investment in each other's well-being without transactional expectation. These relationships can't be optimized, standardized, or scaled for profit because they depend on qualities like vulnerability, patience, and unconditional support that don't translate into marketable products. What the market has delivered instead are connection substitutes that simulate community while extracting value from your need for belonging. Social media platforms generate over $200 billion annually by commodifying your relationships, turning every interaction into data that can be sold to advertisers while using psychological manipulation techniques to maximize your engagement and dependence. Dating apps have created $8 billion industry by gamifying romantic connection, transforming intimate relationships into consumer experiences where you swipe through other human beings like products in a catalog. Professional networking platforms sell access to career connections that were once naturally available through workplace relationships and industry communities. The psychological impact of these connection substitutes is measurably destructive. Research consistently shows that people who rely primarily on digital platforms for social connection experience higher rates of loneliness, depression, and social anxiety than those who maintain primarily offline community relationships. But here's the mechanism that keeps you trapped. As authentic community institutions like neighborhood association, union halls, religious congregations, and local clubs have been weakened by economic pressures and cultural changes promoted by neoliberal individualism, you have fewer alternatives to commodified connection. You're forced to purchase community through platforms and services, which provide just enough social interaction to temporarily relieve your loneliness, while never delivering the deep belonging that would free you from dependence on their product. The third mechanism transforms your need for physical safety and security into what I call the securitization of well-being. According to Friedman's framework, private security services would provide superior protection because market competition would drive companies to develop more effective, more responsive, and more cost-efficient safety solutions than government-provided public safety. His theory suggested that when you could choose your own security services based on your specific needs and budget, you would receive better protection while reducing the social costs of maintaining large public safety bureaucracies. The implementation of this philosophy has created a multi-billion-dollar security industry that profits from your fear while creating the very insecurity it claims to address. Americans now spend over $350 billion annually on private security services, home security systems, personal protection products, and gated community premiums. This represents a 400% increase in private security spending over the past 20 years, occurring simultaneously with dramatic reductions in public investment in community safety infrastructure like youth programs, mental health services, economic development, and conflict resolution resources. Here's how the mechanism operates to your detriment. as public resources for addressing the root causes of insecurity such as poverty, social isolation, mental health crises, and economic inequality are systematically reduced, the symptoms of social breakdown become more visible and frightening. Rising homelessness, untreated mental illness, economic desperation, and community fragmentation create genuine safety concerns that affect your daily life. But instead of addressing these problems through collective investment in social solutions, you're offered individual consumer solutions that promise to protect you from the consequences of social neglect. The result is a security industry that has direct financial incentives to maintain the conditions that make you feel unsafe. Security companies profit more when crime rates are higher, when social tensions are elevated, and when you feel personally vulnerable. They have no incentive to support the social investments in education, economic opportunity, community development, and mental health services that would actually reduce the underlying causes of insecurity. Instead, they market increasingly sophisticated and expensive products that promise personal protection. The social environment that generates insecurity remains unchanged or worsens. This creates what psychologists call learned helplessness on a social scale. You begin to believe that insecurity is a natural condition of modern life, rather than a consequence of specific policy choices that prioritize individual market solutions over collective well-being. You purchase security products and services to manage your anxiety about personal safety, but these purchases never address the systemic conditions that make society genuinely less safe for everyone. You remain trapped in cycles of consumption that generate profits for security, while the underlying social problems that threaten everyone's well-being continue to intensify. The fourth mechanism operates through what I call the medicalization of social problems. Milton Friedman advocated for healthcare markets where pharmaceutical companies would compete to develop innovative treatments that would be more effective and affordable than government-funded healthcare solutions. His vision promised that profit incentives would drive rapid medical advancement, while competition would ensure that life-saving treatments remained accessible to everyone who needed them. What this market approach has actually created is a pharmaceutical industry that systematically reframes social and economic problems as individual medical conditions that require ongoing pharmaceutical intervention. The numbers reveal the scope of this transformation. Over 70% of Americans now take at least one prescription medication regularly, with antidepressant, anti-anxiety medication, and sleep aids representing the fastest growing category. Pharmaceutical companies generate over $500 billion annually in revenue, with the highest profit margins coming from medication that treat conditions directly related to social, economic insecurity, and community breakdown. Here's the mechanism that should concern you deeply. When social conditions like economic inequality, workplace exploitation, social isolation, and environmental degradation predictably generate psychological distress in large populations, a profit-driven healthcare system has powerful incentives to treat the symptoms of this distress through individual medical interventions, rather than addressing the social causes. If your depression is caused by economic insecurity, social isolation, and meaningless work, antidepressant medications can temporarily manage your symptoms while leaving the underlying causes completely unchanged. Research demonstrates that the majority of mental health conditions have strong correlations with social determinants like income inequality, job insecurity, social isolation, and community breakdown. Countries with stronger social safety nets, more economic equality, and better community support systems have dramatically lower rates of depression, anxiety, and suicide, even after controlling for genetic and individual factors. But pharmaceutical companies profit more when these social problems are treated as individual medical conditions requiring lifelong medication management, rather than social issues requiring collective political solutions. The psychological trap this creates is particularly insidious because medical treatment feels scientific and legitimate in ways that social criticism does not. When you're suffering from anxiety or depression, being told that you have a brain chemistry imbalance that can be corrected with medication feels more hopeful and actionable than being told that your suffering is caused by economic and social that would require massive collective effort to change. But pharmaceutical solutions create dependence on ongoing consumption while often producing side effects that require additional medication, generating increasing profits for companies while leaving you increasingly dependent on medical interventions for basic psychological functioning. The fifth mechanism transforms your relationship with food and nourishment through what I call the commodification of nutrition. Friedman argued that free food markets would provide superior nutrition outcomes because competition would drive companies to produce healthier, more affordable food, while consumer choice would reward businesses that best served people's nutritional needs. His framework suggested that government involvement in food production and distribution created inefficiencies and limited choices that prevented people from accessing optimal nutrition. The reality of neoliberal food markets reveals a system that generates profits by creating and then exploiting nutritional dysfunction. The same market forces that were supposed to deliver optimal nutrition instead produced a food system where the most profitable products are those that combine maximum palatability with minimal nutritional value and maximum addictive potential. Ultra-processed foods now represent over 60% of the average person's caloric intake. Despite overwhelming scientific evidence, these products contribute directly to obesity, diabetes, heart disease, and mental health problems. But here's where the mechanism becomes truly exploitative. It's the same market system that profits from making you sick through cheap, addictive, nutritionally food then sells you expensive solutions to the health it created. Americans now spend over $200 billion annually on diet products, nutritional supplements, weight loss programs, and specialty health food that promise to restore the health that was damaged by the standard food system. The weight loss industry alone generates $72 billion in annual revenue by offering temporary solutions to permanent problems created by food manufacturers. The psychological manipulation embedded in this system is sophisticated and devastating. Food companies employ teams of food scientists and behavioral psychologists to engineer products that override your natural satiety signals and create patterns of compulsive consumption. These products are specifically designed to be impossible to eat in moderation, using combinations of salt, sugar, and fat that trigger dopamine responses similar to addictive drugs. When you inevitably gain weight, develop health problems, or feel out of control around food, you're not told that you're responding normally to products that were designed to create these exact responses. Instead, you're sold the narrative of individual responsibility and offered consumer solutions that promise to restore your control through willpower, discipline, and the right combination of diet products and programs. When these solutions inevitably fail because they don't address the underlying food environment that created the problem, you blame yourself for lacking commitment or discipline rather than questioning a system that profits from your nutritional dysfunction. You then purchase additional diet products and programs, generating more profits for companies while remaining trapped in cycles of food-related shame and consumption that can never address the systemic conditions that make healthy eating difficult and expensive for most people. The sixth mechanism operates through what I call the financialization of life security. Milton Friedman championed the privatization of Social Security and retirement planning, arguing that individuals could achieve better financial outcomes by investing their retirement savings in private markets rather than relying on government-managed social insurance programs. His promise was that market-based retirement accounts would deliver superior returns while giving people control over their financial destinies rather than depending on bureaucratic government programs. What privatized retirement planning has actually delivered is a system that transfers the risks of economic volatility of society as a whole onto individual workers while generating massive profits for financial services. Today, over $60 trillion in retirement assets are managed by private financial firms that collect fees regardless of whether your investments gain or lose value. These fees compound over decades of saving, ultimately reducing typical retirement accounts by 20 to 40% compared to what the same contributions would have generated in low-fee, professionally managed social insurance systems. But the psychological impact of privatized life security extends far beyond these direct financial costs. When your economic security in old age depends on individual ability to navigate complex financial markets, make correct investment decisions, and avoid major market downturns during critical periods, retirement planning becomes a source of chronic anxiety rather than confidence. Research shows that people with privatized retirement accounts experience significantly higher levels of financial stress, sleep problems, and anxiety-related health issues compared to those with guaranteed social insurance benefits. Here's the mechanism that keeps you trapped. Financial services companies profit more when you're anxious about your financial future because anxiety drives more frequent trading, higher fee investment products, and additional financial services consumption. They have direct incentives to promote financial insecurity through marketing that emphasizes worst-case scenarios, the complexity of financial planning, and the inadequacy of your current savings. The more worried you are about your financial future, the more likely you are to purchase expensive financial products and services that generate profits for companies while often reducing your actual financial security through fees, taxes, and poor investment timing. This creates a psychological state researchers call financial learned helpless, where you become so overwhelmed by the complexity and risk of managing your own financial security that you become dependent on financial professionals and products that may not serve your interests. You spend increasing amounts of time and money on financial planning and investment management while experiencing decreasing confidence in your financial future, because the system is designed to generate ongoing anxiety and consumption rather than actual security. The seventh mechanism transforms your living environment through what I call the real estate extraction economy. Friedman advocated for deregulated housing markets where private developers and landlords would compete to provide affordable, quality housing that would be more responsive to individual needs than public housing programs. His theory suggested that removing government interference from housing markets would increase housing supply, reduce costs, and improve quality as market competition rewarded businesses that best served consumer preferences. The implementation of these policies has created housing markets that systematically extract wealth from people who need places to live while concentrating ownership among investors who treat housing as financial instruments rather than human shelter. Over the past 2 decades, housing costs have increased at nearly twice the rate of income growth, making homeownership unaffordable for the majority of working people, while rental costs consume 30 to 50% of typical household income in most metropolitan areas. But here's where housing commodification creates particularly destructive psychological effects. When housing is treated primarily as an investment vehicle rather than a human necessity, your living environment becomes unstable and expensive in ways that generate chronic stress and prevent the establishment of genuine community roots. Research consistently demonstrates that housing instability is one of the strongest predictors of mental health problems, educational difficulties in children, and social isolation in adults. The mechanism operates through what economists call rent extraction, where property owners generate profits not by providing better housing or services, but by controlling access to a basic human necessity in markets where supply is artificially constrained. Property investment companies now own millions of single-family homes that were previously owner-occupied, converting homeownership opportunities into rental income streams while driving up housing costs for everyone. Meanwhile, zoning regulations and development restrictions that benefit existing property owners create artificial scarcity that allows landlords and sellers to charge premium prices for basic shelter. This system traps you in relationships with housing that are fundamentally exploitative and psychologically destructive. Instead of having a stable home that you control and that appreciates in value for your benefit, you're forced to transfer increasing portions of your income to property owners while maintaining no equity, no control over your living environment, and no security against rent increases or eviction. The psychological impact includes chronic anxiety about housing costs, social isolation due to frequent moves, and inability to establish the stable community connections that support mental health and well-being. The eighth and final mechanism I want to reveal operates through what I call the gamification of self-improvement. Milton Friedman's philosophy suggested that market competition would create superior personal development resources because entrepreneurs would have strong incentives to develop products and services that actually help people improve their lives. His framework promised that consumer choice would reward businesses that delivered real results while eliminating ineffective approaches through competitive market pressures. What has emerged instead is a personal development industry that generates over $15 billion annually by exploiting your dissatisfaction with conditions that are created by the same neoliberal system that profits from selling you solutions. This industry has perfected the art of transforming systemic social problems into individual deficiencies that can supposedly be corrected through the right combination of mindset shifts, productivity techniques, and personal optimization strategies. The mechanism operates by convincing you that problems caused by economic inequality, social isolation, job insecurity, and environmental degradation are actually problems caused by your insufficient personal development. If you're anxious about money, you're told that you need better financial mindset training rather than economic policies that provide living wages and job security. If you're lonely and isolated, you're sold social skills courses and confidence coaching rather than community institutions that naturally foster belonging. If you're exhausted by the demands of modern work, you're offered time management systems and productivity hacks rather than workplace policies that respect human limitations and needs. Research reveals that people who consume large amounts of self-improvement content actually experience decreased life satisfaction and increased anxiety at time, because these approaches consistently fail to address the external conditions that create the problems they claim to solve. But the industry is designed to interpret these failures as evidence that you need more self-improvement rather than less. When positive thinking doesn't improve your financial situation, you're told you need deeper mindset work. When productivity systems don't reduce your workplace stress, you're offered more advanced optimization techniques. This creates what psychologists call the self-improvement trap, where you become increasingly focused on changing yourself to adapt to conditions that are harmful to human well-being, rather than questioning why these conditions exist or working collectively to change them. You spend increasing amounts of time, money, and mental energy on personal development, while the systemic conditions that necessitate this endless self-optimization remain unchanged or worsen. The industry profits from your ongoing dissatisfaction while ensuring that you never achieve the lasting improvement that would free you from dependence on their product. Now that you understand these 8 mechanisms through which neoliberalism has systematically converted your basic human needs into profit centers for others, let me synthesize the core contradiction that underlies the entire system. Milton Friedman promised that market mechanisms would deliver superior outcomes for individuals by aligning business incentives with consumer welfare. But what these mechanisms reveal is a system where business profits are maximized not by solving your problems, but by creating and perpetuating the conditions that make you dependent on ongoing consumption of products and services that can never fully address the problems they claim to solve. This is the fundamental deception of neoliberal wellness. It profits from your ongoing unwellness while positioning itself as the solution to problems it systematically creates and maintains. Every mechanism I've described operates by first removing or undermining the social, economic, and environmental conditions that naturally support human well-being, then selling you individual consumer solutions to the problems created by this removal. You're not failing at wellness because you lack discipline, commitment, or the right product. You're struggling because you're trying to purchase individual solutions to problems that can only be solved collectively through social and economic changes that prioritize human well-being over market profits. The path forward requires recognizing that authentic well-being is not a product you can buy, but a condition that emerges from living in social and economic environments that support human flourishing. This means understanding that your individual wellness is inseparable from collective well-being, and that lasting solutions require building social institutions and economic policies that prioritize human needs over market profit. Your first step is developing what I call market literacy, the ability to recognize when your genuine human needs are being exploited for profit. Every time you're offered an individual consumer solution to what is fundamentally a social problem, pause and ask yourself, what social or economic conditions would need to exist for this problem, not to require individual consumer solutions? Every time you're told that your well-being depends on purchasing the right products or services, consider what collective institutions or policies would make these purchases unnecessary. Your second step is practicing collective resistance to the commodification of well-being. This means prioritizing relationships, activities, and institutions that provide genuine nourishment without requiring financial transactions. Join or create community organizations that address social problems through mutual aid rather than market solutions. Support political candidates and policies that strengthen public institutions and social safety rather than privatizing them. Choose, whenever possible, to meet your needs through sharing, cooperation, and community building rather than individual consumption. Your third step is recognizing that your personal healing and liberation is inseparable from broader social transformation. The same economic system that converts your well-being into profit also creates the inequality, insecurity, and social breakdown that make individual wellness so difficult to achieve and maintain. Working for economic policies that prioritize human well-being over corporate profits isn't just political activism. It's a fundamental wellness practice that addresses the root causes of individual suffering. The future of authentic well-being depends on your ability to see through the illusion that freedom means having more consumer choices and recognizing that true freedom means living in a society where your basic needs for security, connection, purpose, and health are guaranteed as human rights rather than privileges you must purchase. This understanding is your foundation for resistance, your path to genuine wellness, and your contribution to creating a world where well-being belongs to everyone rather than only those who can afford to buy it.